Hey, mobile learning folks. I wanted to come at you today and I don't know if apologize is the right word, but maybe explain myself when I am asking you to read an article, this one by Klein and Pinch, Users as Agents of Technological Change, that, it's a little bit older than some of the stuff that we've been reading. And just what the heck that rural automobile adoption might have to do with mobile learning. Because topic-wise, it's maybe a bit of a stretch. But I do have a reason. I do have an explanation. I think maybe first of all, this paper was one that I was given to read as a grad student in a subject and environment that I kind of felt out of place, and that I didn't really know the words and the conversations that had been going on that helped me analyze and break down the situation. Reason two is that while the historical remove of things that happened technologically a century and more ago seems to make things not recent, it also gives us some historical perspective. I'm not going to say objectivity, but at least like less subjectivity when we're thinking about the ways that these events transpired and sort of what the ultimate outcomes were versus what people were worrying about at the time, or what seemed like the story was going to be in terms of how things would play out way back then. Being able to look at our world now, especially like the part of the world that I happen to live in, was largely built up in terms of human activity in the shadow of the coming onslaught of automobiles. All these neighborhoods and things were constructed in a world where suburban automobile-driven life was the model that was being pursued. Something that could not have been imagined back in 1905 or whenever, when these cars started to be the new weird tools that people were playing around with, and cities were trying to figure out how to start dealing with, and there were differences between how people were imagining their uses in different places. There were forms of resistance, and all of those things went down in a way that couldn't have been anticipated. And so that gets me to reason three for this, is that I think a lot of the conversations about technological change, about technology influencing the way of things, and this class is certainly one that exists based on a question, what do mobile phones change about the world of education? What can you do with them? A lot of these conversations are far too focused on physical affordances and constraints, sort of the logistical, technical details, and assuming that those details can only lead to one kind of thing, and that they lead there, sort of physically, logically. And so one of the things that we get by looking at the actual history of how the automobile was first, dismissed by rural people and then adopted in ways that the manufacturers couldn't have thought of, and actually where these rural users were remaking what the automobile could and would be, and then also the interplay that happens after the fact where the manufacturers enclose these uses within their understanding of the automobile. These are the kinds of things that have been happening for about the last decade or so with smartphones. Back when I started this whole business, I was still going around to people saying, oh, look at this device I've got here. Someday a bunch of you are going to have these things in your pocket, and they're going to be able to play videos and music, and they're going to be able to communicate with other people at great distances. And I was doing this back when people were looking at me funny at the possibility of this. And before I knew it, this stuff was everywhere. And a part of life that is hard to ignore at this point, but very much where we're still trying to figure out what it can mean for us. And so there's certainly no shortage of people, like the people who will pump up M-learning, talking about what the potentials are for transforming education through these things. And we're also familiar with a lot of the naysayers, a lot of these refusals. The most common thing to do with phones in school is still by far to outlaw them, to tell students to put them away or not bring them in, and certainly not have them out in class. But we don't really know yet where this is all going to go. And it may take quite a while to shake out, and it will shake out in different ways in different places, and probably not along the lines of technical, logistical details, but in weird, historically contingent, socially determined kind of ways. And they will happen in different ways at different times by different groups of people. The interplay between global and local issues is different than it was 100 years ago, but still one of the things that can sort of change how these things work out. And then ultimately, those meanings are not merely, those ultimate meanings that this stuff will take on are not merely within the boxes themselves, the phones, the networks, those kinds of things, but they're the things that we creatively do. We create those meanings. We decide what we're going to use these things with. Now, not you and me, not all the time, because we're sort of stuck with what everyone else may have decided at the time that we're working with them. But people have a role to play, and not just the people who create the technologies, but the people who use them. They are a huge part of creating that meaning, negotiating that meaning. And then what we can see is also responses from those producers who then get to contribute, and they get to contribute with a whole lot more control, of course, and the money to do the manufacturing. Anyway, I feel like getting to look at the automobile and how this stuff worked out, and picking up vocabulary for social control of social creation of technology, the vocabulary of closure, that these were analytic terms that helped me try and break down some of the situations that I was hoping to intervene in. And so I hope it's useful vocabulary for you. I hope also getting to look at a technology from such a remove, and then thinking about, how the world became what it was through what cars ended up meaning to people. There's a lot of good things there. There's a lot of bad things there. There's some things that we're kind of stuck with, particularly in a city like Albuquerque, at a time when everyone having a car and driving to get everywhere no longer seems like the American dream. At a time when we're far more worried about the emissions that we're putting out into the world. At a time when the idea of maintaining road infrastructure starts to sound really expensive. Anyway, I hope that little bit of perspective is worth the trouble about reading something from so long ago.